So how do chefs save money when buying steaks? They portion it themselves. Huge thank you to Maiden for sponsoring today's video. More on them later. Let me show you how. The first subprimal we're gonna tackle is a sirloin, one of my favorite steaks. It's also known as a New York strip, a strip loin, and in some parts of Australia, for some reason, they call it a porterhouse, although I don't agree with that one, because the last subprimal I'm gonna show you is one of my favorites. It's probably the most advanced of this lot, and it'll explain why I don't think this is a porterhouse. So what do you need? A tray for your meat. You want some other vehicle to house all your beef fat trimmings and something to house all the meat trimmings. A nice big chef's knife like this, and then a boning knife is also pretty important in this scenario as well. Sometimes they're flexible, sometimes they're not. This one's not super flexible. You want a thin blade, pointy tip, nice and sharp. That's for kind of getting silver skin and stuff off. First things first, take your sirloin and have a look. See where it needs some love and where it doesn't. I can see in this one, some of the fat caps missing from this section here. I've just opened this from the bag and I've patted off any of the all the juices that were in the bag. We're gonna look underneath, hardly any silver skin under here, which is kind of a positive thing. Less that we have to take it off and less that we pay for. We can see here the side, the fat cap's quite uneven. So there's two ways to attack that fat cap. You can try and trim it when it's whole like this. I prefer to do it once they're steaks. I think you get better control because it's an expensive piece of meat. You need to treat it with a bit of respect. We're gonna start with the fat cap down. There's a piece here called the chain, or I call it the chain. There's two schools of thought here. At home, you might leave it on. In the restaurant world, we take it off because it can look a bit messy. So it's as simple as that. You find that seam and you can run your hand down. Don't forget, we're not throwing this out. We're just not using it on these steaks. As you're trimming, cut off any of the fat and keep it separate. Well, we all know tallow is the best thing to cook steaks in, so we're gonna make our own. That's the fat tray. That's the good edible meat tray. See all the silver skin? We need to get this off. Point your knife under the silver skin, point your knife up a little bit, I'll exaggerate it, and then run it across. And when we pull the silver skin off, we want as little meat on there as possible. Ideally, you want it to look like that. For me, I don't bother keeping silver skin. I put that in the pile there, and my dog gets it for dinner. Some people will put it through their mince, but I tend not to. All right, I'm happy with that side. To the top, just take all that silver skin off. There's my Hoover coming into action. So why take silver skin off? It's just tough and hard to eat. Not gonna hurt you if you do eat it. You're just gonna be chewing on it for a while. All right, I'm happy with the top. I'm gonna flip this around and show you. At one end of your sirloin, you're gonna have a piece that runs there. It won't run all the way up, although I will trim that pretty hard up that way. We're gonna take that off. Again, you can leave this on if you're trying to keep it as economical as possible. I've always taken this off. Then if we look at the other end, so this end's actually what butts up to the cube roll or the ribeye, and you can see there's a bit of a different structure here. You start getting a bit of the cap there. But this end's always a bit funny, so what I do is I always kind of follow this other end all the way along and save it for trim. So we're gonna find that seam at this end. We're just gonna run our blade up it. Basically just follow that all the way up the side and then keep it nice and straight. So you can see that's kind of where it stopped at that point there, and I still just cut through. Run your blade all the way through it. There you go. So I'm gonna take that meat off there now, and I'll leave the fat to render later. Same as the other side, trim up any silver skin, keep it nice and tidy, and I'm pretty happy with that. So we're pretty much at the point of portioning. I like to start at this end, which is like the clean end of the sirloin, and I'll leave that ribeye end till the end. First things first is you want to square off the edge. You can see here that this edge is like this. I like to start with the square edge. Two schools of thought. You can just start cutting steaks and have a wonky steak to start with. But I think it's better to start with a clean edge. So just flatten that first one off, trim the fat off, use it for your lunch, little minute steak, or you can just put it in your pile to be minced. So now that we have got a nice clean face, we're gonna go and portion our steaks. I like to eat 300, 350 gram steaks. So that's how big we're gonna cut them, which is roughly 2 fingers, maybe a bit more than 2 fingers thick. The other thing you can do, you can cut a 600 gram steak and use it as a roast. You could cut minute steaks and just cut them, 1 finger or half a finger thick. It's kind of one of the great benefits to doing this yourself. I'm just gonna cut this into steaks for me to eat, all roughly the same size. So this end of the steak will cook quite differently to this end of the steak, because you have some of these like sinew lines coming in. Nothing wrong with it. In restaurant world, we always used to save these end pieces for people that ordered medium to well done steaks, because it has a bit more time to cook. Some of those connective tissues will have a bit more time to break down. This piece of beef has a massive fat cap on it. I haven't seen a fat cap like that in a long time. So just take each steak and assess it. This one's pretty good. Like I kind of showed you at the start, we're missing that piece there, but we are going to trim this little corner off here so it's a bit more even. The reason you want an even fat cap, as even as possible, you don't want like a big lump like that, is because when it's rendering, you want it to render at the same time as the rest of it. And I didn't trim the end of this one. I didn't flatten the face. That's because I'm just going to eat it right now anyway. The other thing we'll do is start rendering this fat, cut it all down. The smaller you get it, the better it's going to render, or the faster it's going to render, I should say. So into a pot, and we're going to put about a cup of water into the bottom as well. I'm going to put that on a medium heat. Once the water's completely evaporated, You're gonna turn it down to a low heat and you're gonna render it out until all that fat is like lovely clear, like it's slightly golden color. So what to do with the scrap? Well, you can go through it and cut out some stuff for like stir fry, or if you've got a mincer, you can mince it all and save it for making burgers or for making bolognese sauce. You can also mince the stuff by hand. It takes a bit of work, but you can do it. So you go through it like that, one way, turn it around and then go through it the other way. It'll be chunkier than your normal one, but that's all right. And any of the gristly bits like that, especially these silver skin bits, that's duck's dinner. So there you go, 1 sirloin, 11 steaks. Well, let's call it 10 steaks and 1 for lunch. Let's cook this thing. When cooking a steak, using a pan that has good heat retention is key. Today, I'm using the 10-inch seasoned carbon steel frying pan from Maiden's Carbon Steel collection. Carbon steel is a great hybrid of cast iron and stainless steel, heats up quickly, retains heat, and is still light enough to move around as you use it. And the more you use it over time, it'll naturally develop a non-stick surface. This pan can go from stovetop to oven and even open fire up to 650 degrees Celsius, but we do not need that much heat for today's steak. Maiden products are used in over 2,000 top-rated restaurants and are also designed for the home cooks. So check out the Carbon Steel collection and my other favorite cookware from Maiden by using the link in my description. Now let's see how that steak eats. Yum. Nice medium rare. Delicious. Next up, let's portion up a fillet steak. Tenderloin, eye fillet, filet mignon, Chateaubriand, lots of names for this one. I just call it a beef fillet. Same as before, assess what you're working with to start with. You got a big piece of silver skin here. There is what I call the chain running down here. You can leave it on or take it off. I usually take it off. And the underside, there's just some big fat deposits. Again, you can leave those on if you want to take this off. This is the head of the fillet. This is the center cut or the Chateaubriand, and the tail. We're just gonna portion this into steaks, but at any point, if you would like want to do a beef Wellington, you want the center cut, you just take this bit for a beef Wellington. The only tricky part is what you do with the head, because there's a piece of sinew running up here, but I'll show you how I tackle that. First things first, find the seam, take that chain off if you so desire. Worth going through that, taking all the meat out of it, so you can just take that piece of sinewy stuff there. That is all really good for stir fry meat. I'm gonna clean out the side a bit, take some of those fat deposits off. They're gonna fall off anyway, nice and clean like that. This is a Carrara Wagyu fillet as well, not a flex, just explaining it might look a bit different to what a lot of fillets will look like. I'm gonna take this big piece of silver skin off that runs all the way along here. Start at one side, same as before, poke it through, run it off. Now, there's a big piece of sinew that runs right through here. When I was a younger chef, I used to get really particular about trying to get really in there and pull it all apart. Try not to dig too much into there, you're just gonna ruin it. Flip it over, lots of fat deposits and silver skin up at this head end. Get all those off, and the same all the way through the rest of this kind of center cut. You can leave all this on if you really wanted to. I usually trim a bit of it off. So the head, you can cut this off here. You can roast that whole in a pan and then slice it and serve it for 2 to share. I prefer to take it off and then find the seam and just run your blade down it, splitting it into 2, and then you're gonna clean each of these up. There you go, there's a nice steak. Same with this side, you can clean this up or you can slice it and use it for stir fry. Makes really good stir fry meat. Super lean, cooks nice and quick. Stir fry at a fillet steak in this economy? What are you, crazy? That's a nice little steak there too, actually. So then we're just left with this beautiful piece of meat, lean. I mean, this has got lots of fat on it because it's Wagyu, but usually super lean. And we can just cut steaks. Oh, it's pretty well marbled. Fillets don't normally look like this. Usually just gonna find it rosy meat. Tricky part when you get to this end, you just spend a lot of money on this piece of meat and you end up with this, right? You're tempted to kind of do this and push it down. Honestly, I'm gonna trim that real tail part off, put that aside for stir fry, and then just use that piece of meat here. The only thing I will do as well is this side piece I'm gonna trim off as well, because that's just gonna overcook anyway. From that, I got kind of 6 nice steaks and then 1 kind of smaller one. So 7 steaks, enough stir fry beef for 2, I guess. For me and Kaylin, that'd be enough. There's a bit of stir fry meat there as well. Don't have any fat to render, but you got a bunch of silver skin that you can give to the dog. Simple. Okay, this is what I call a rump. It's also called a top sirloin, a bottom round, a round. It's where the rump cat comes from, also known as the picanha. There's a few different muscles to break down, I'm going to show you through. I think this is a fantastic place to start your home butchery. I also think it's a really good value proposition if you've got a family, because you can get a bunch of different types of meat for different things. Anyway, let's get stuck in. Assess your subprimal. There's the picanha, which we'll deal with first of all, and then we can start cleaning up this bottom part. Not a huge fat cap, pretty uneven, but not a huge fat cap on this. To get this picanha off, seam butchery, just like before. You're gonna see this big eye or the big face, and you're just gonna, actually hot tip, if it's sliding around the board like that, there's probably still a bit of moisture on there. It's a bit dangerous, so make sure you dry it really well. So back to getting that picanha off, you're gonna find that seam and just run your fingers up it. You could literally pull this apart. We're not going to, because we're not barbarons. When it gets caught up, just run your knife through it. Once we know we're at the end of the picanha, I can see that from there. We're gonna run our blade all the way through the fat cap and then follow that seam all the way down. There's our cap, or our picanha. Take all the silver skin off the bottom. That's pretty much it. Now you can go through and trim some of this fat cap off the top if you want to, just to even it out a little bit. Make sure you don't go through and you leave an even amount of fat on there. I'm gonna trim these sides because we've got a bit of fat hanging over. And that's it. So what do you do with it? You can roast it whole, you can reverse sear it, you can cut it to put it on skewers like they do in Brazil and cook it over charcoal. You can cut it into steaks. I've got heaps of videos about picanha if you want some ideas to do what to do with this. For this video, we're just gonna keep it whole. So here, sometimes you get lucky and they leave little muscle here, which is a really great snack. It'll just be this piece here. I would just cut this out, especially if I'm doing this at home, shove that in a pan and eat it. I don't know why, I think that there just eats really, really well. I'm full up on steak right now, so I'm not gonna bother eating that. So what I want to get out of this is some actual rump steaks with a fat cap on it. So we're going to use this fat cap here to cut those steaks. So we're just going to run our blade straight through that muscle there. There's another muscle in there that I actually just cut in half, which you can also pull off and use. I usually pull it off and put it in my pile of trim for stir fry. It's also a good muscle just to eat as a snack. We are going to take it off because it probably will fall off anyway if we don't. But you can trim that up and it eats well. Just like the picanha, we're just going to trim the bottom of this up. And same on this side, this face. If you see any seams like that, just pull the meat back and trim the silver skin underneath it. So the grain's running kind of this way. So we need to cut steaks this way. So it'll be quite big steaks, but that's okay. We'll trim up the fat cap like we do at the end. We're just going to take nice big steaks. We can cut them in half if we need to afterwards. There's a big rump steak. Trim this end off. Just going to trim some of this fat down. It's pretty aggressive. I'll leave a pretty big fat cap on it though. So there's 3 really nice big steaks. To be perfectly honest, if I was feeding like a family of 4, I'd eat that. I'd give that to Caitlin and I'd cut that in half and give it to the kids. Then we got this piece here. Now we don't have a fat cap on it. It's not super ideal for steaks. It's going to be pretty dry. I like to use this for things like sandwiches. So we're going to clean this up completely, get all the silver skin and all the scraggly fat off it. There's a really big seam right here. Just follow that seam all the way through and then trim any of that silver skin off and sinew from the middle. I'd take that, I'm gonna roast it really hot, lots of salt and pepper, maybe some steak seasoning, and keep it really rare, and then I'm gonna put it in the fridge overnight. It'll last for 3 or 4 days in the fridge, no problem. Slice it really thin for steak sandwiches. Then with all this, I'm gonna make as much stir-fry beef as I can. So the only thing I will say with this is take any fat off, any sinew off, and leave that in the pile. This is already cut kind of, you know, like against the grain. There's really short grains here, so we can just cut it like this. But if you've got any pieces like this, make sure you're cutting against the grain. So there you go, from one rump, we've got a whole picanha that'll easily feed 4 people. We've got enough rump steak to feed 4 people. We've got enough roast beef for 4 people's roast sandwiches. And we've got enough beef stir fry for at least 4 people. We've also got at least 500 grams of tallow here and a bowl of dog food, or 3 if you're duck size. Next up, the ribeye, also known as a Scotch fillet in some places, a cube roll, an entrecote, and it's the same piece of meat that a tomahawk comes on. There's usually a bone here for a tomahawk or a cowboy cut. Probably my favorite cut of steak. Well, the one I order the most. You can't have favorites, can you? Simple to process as a subprimal. Very similar to the sirloin, but probably even a bit easier. Look at it, see what's going on. Notice here we've got a couple of score lines from the abattoir. Not much you can do about that. Trim off any of the silver skin at the bottom here. This is one piece of meat you could literally just straight portion. It is worth taking the time to make it look a bit tidier. So this is the cap, which is the tastiest part of the animal. So you don't want to disturb that too much. That's that seam there. Don't be tempted to pull that off. The one thing we will do is in that cap though, this is where the ribs lie. They run like this. When this piece of meat's being processed, there's someone that's taken these ribs out with a boning knife like that. I like to kind of just trim those up a bit because there's usually some bits of fat and sinew still left behind. Sometimes this will be way more pronounced than it is on this piece. This is like silver skin, but at like another level. So really, really tough. And that's basically been hugging the bone. If you see that, definitely take that off. There's a really good example of it there. This one doesn't have a huge fat cap on it. It's not really an issue, just an observation. You know, I'll turn it around. This is the other side where these bones come up. Sometimes there is big nuggets of fat here that I will pull off. There's plenty of fat on the inside of this piece of meat, so I wouldn't stress too much. People are always like, oh, fat's flavor. Absolutely, completely agree. Fat is flavor, but there is such a thing as too much of a good thing. I like to start at the nicest end, which I think is this end, the end that has the bigger cap. We're pretty much ready to go. We're ready to portion it. First things first is that you can cut a nice face off the front. This is why it's called the ribeye. You'll have an eye of fat around the outside. I have like a loin of meat here, and then the cap. At this end here, you're gonna have a massive cap, so all that is cap. I sound like a 10-year-old boy at the bus station. I wouldn't bother doing anything with that other than shoving some salt on it and whacking it on the barbie or the grill or whatever and cooking it for lunch. If I've got 10 mates coming over, I'm gonna cut this whole thing into steak. If I'm cutting this just to eat, because I want to have some steak in the freezer, I might take this much and keep it as a roast, and then I'll portion the rest. It's really up to you. It's the beauty of doing it like this. But for the purpose of this, I'm gonna just cut this into steaks. I'm gonna do like 2 fingers thick. They're gonna be like 350, 400 gram steaks. And I think that's the beauty of cutting steaks yourself, is that you can control the thickness, because I don't care what anyone says, if you get one of those scrangly supermarket steaks that are about this thick, or even thinner than this, it's really hard to get a good cuisson. What's a cuisson, you say? Well, it's a fancy French term for the temperature or how you want your steak cooked. So those little thin supermarket steaks, even though they're called premium and the beef is good quality, when they're really thin like this, it's really hard to get both a good crust and not overcook the inside. So it's a really good reason to do this yourself, or just go to your butcher and buy steaks. So this is not a really highly marbled steak, and that is fine. There is nothing wrong with steaks that have this amount of marbling in it. We've kind of been spoiled lately on social media. Everyone kind of shows these like crazy marbled steaks all the time, and I'm completely guilty of it myself, but this is the steak I grew up eating, and there's nothing wrong with it. Even less marbling, there's nothing wrong with it. That last one's a bit ugly, but that's all right. 11 steaks. A little bit of lunch for me, some trim that's probably not worth much other than there's a bit of stir fry meat there, lots of dog food, a little bit of fat, and for probably half the price than you'd pay for 4 or 5 of these steaks in a supermarket or butcher. So this is a short loin. This is advanced level home butchery. Let's just start by saying that. So there's 2 cuts of meat that come from this. The porterhouse, like I talked about at the start. I don't know why some Australians call a sirloin a porterhouse, because it's not, and a T-bone. We'll talk about the nuances between those 2 cuts in a second. But if we think about where this is in the animal, this big end here, this is the eye fillet. And this here, from going on here, this butts up to the sirloin, right? This end down here, so this is the end of the fillet. This is the ribeye. So this is where the ribeye starts. You can see here the start of the cap. So as that goes longer, the eye gets bigger and then the cap comes around. So what's the difference between a T-bone and a porterhouse? Effectively, it's how much fillet it has. So this is the eye fillet. The head of the eye fillet, like we talked about, is here. This is kind of the center cut of the eye fillet that's up against the rib cage. So to be considered a porterhouse, where this bone is, it needs to have at least 2.5 centimeters of fillet. Depending on how thick you cut them, to about here, they're gonna be porterhouses. Once they're around 1 centimeter or less, the amount of fillet you've got next to that bone, they're considered T-bones. Porterhouses, T-bones, same piece of meat. So how do you attack these? Well, you need a special tool known as a meat saw. There's a big piece of fat here. We're actually just gonna kind of top this. We'll trim it off anyway, and it's gonna make it easier for us to see. Just like before, we'll trim this fat cap so it's nice and even. First things first, we're gonna think about how thick we want these. And this is the benefit to doing this yourself, is you can control how thick you want it. Now, if you're gonna buy a piece of meat like this, you can probably ask your butcher to cut it how thick you want it, but you're gonna save money by doing it yourself. I want it to be about 1 kilo once I'm finished cutting with the bone in, so I haven't done this in a while. I'm guessing that's about here. First things first is that we use a knife, and we cut as much as we can with a knife. The reason doing that is because we're going to use a saw just to cut the bone. We don't want to cut the muscle with the saw, because it makes an absolutely horrible job of it, and no one likes that. So we've kind of figured out where we're going to cut it, and you can see here I've cut all the way through the meat on this side, and the same here on this fillet. And we hope that my eyesight's good and I've cut it in the right place. If I was doing this in a bandsaw, I would flatten this first. Because I'm not doing it on a bandsaw, I'm not going to bother. So now we come in with the saw and we start cutting through that bone. If you get through it and you realize that you're still cutting through flesh, stop, use your knife, and keep cutting until you find bone again. And I hope I don't cut into my very nice chopping board. Roll on its side so I can save my board a bit. It's definitely bigger than 1 kilo. Okay, so now we need to clean this up a bit, because what's happened is all this white stuff, it's a mixture of fat and bone. So all that's actually bone that's kind of you cut through. So we're just gonna trim this, getting these scraggly bits off, which is why it's super important. And that's where I've kind of met the 2. But that there is a beautiful, a little bit rough if I'm perfectly honest, porterhouse. We've got a big piece of fillet, we've got a big sirloin. That's definitely more than 1 kilo. I reckon that's like 1.5 kilos. Let's cut a couple more and I'll show you where we get to the T-bone stage. So that's our short loin cut up, and we've got the 3 sections here. So we've got here, the porterhouse. So the one with the biggest piece of fillet, at least kind of an inch and a quarter, so 2.5 to 3 centimeters. Next, we've got the T-bone with at least 1 centimeter or like ½ an inch of fillet at the thickest point. That's a lovely T-bone. These end pieces, they're really not even considered T-bones. You don't have, really much fillet on it at all. That's pretty much a sirloin on the bone, or a strip loin on the bone. And you could probably clean this part up and then run your blade through this part to keep it kind of tidier. But 3 great pieces of meat, great celebratory pieces of meat. I think I said I wanted this to be about 1 kilo. I think I went way over with this one. Let's see. Yeah, that's 1.6. What's this T-bone? 1.3, and the sirloin 1.2. You know, without the bone though, it's probably about 1 kilo. Anyway, I'm hungry. Let's go cook this. I think the best way to cook a big piece of meat like this is to kind of reverse sear it. I'm just gonna put it on my barbecue, bring it up to temperature really slowly, and then we're gonna crank the barbecue as hot as it will go, and we'll seal the outside to get a good crust. So there you go. I know it might seem a bit daunting, but it's not that hard once you do it a few times. And the best part is you get to set your own cuisson, you can cut them as thick as you want, and you save some money. Like this video, if you took anything from it, consider subscribing if you're not subscribed, and we'll see you next week for another video. Peace.